Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Sam, I'm doing fantastically, and I would imagine I'm doing a little bit better than the president right now. Do you want to know why?
Why is that?
Well, this week, apparently, the Court of International Trade in the United States said that all the administration tariffs didn't meet the definition of economic emergency, like the president said it did. And then also, what else did we have? I guess Elon Musk is leaving the government, after claiming to say he would find $2 trillion worth of cuts, finding $1 trillion in cuts, and to the best of my knowledge, none of the cuts have really happened.
Yeah.
And then the whole deal with the big, beautiful bill got passed. So a lot has happened over the last week. And the first two things, I'm kind of thinking maybe it's not the president's best hour.
It probably hasn't been the best week of headlines, I would say. There's been pushback from Harvard and some of the other universities, but the halt of a large chunk of the tariffs, the ruling wasn't about all of them, but the widespread across the board ones from the Liberation Day, rather. Those are largely kind of seemingly being walked back. So yeah, there's been a lot of change with the administration, and you mentioned the one big beautiful bill, as he loves to call it.
One big beautiful bill.
But that's not fixing the deficit. It's not fixing the trend, at least. Yeah. And I think it's not raising it as significantly as some have pointed to, but it is definitely just continuing on and kicking the can down the road, which has been a big promise from the administration going into it.
Well, I would tell you that I think DOGE and the big beautiful bill or whatever are more joined at the hip than anyone would care to admit. If we're going to cut if we're going to cut taxes, make them permanent, what have you, we're going to have to do one of two things: grow the economy much more rapidly than anyone is forecasting, or we're going to have to get serious about cutting government fat. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We can't cut marginal tax rates. It's not a tax cut, but you can't cut marginal tax rates, keep growth the same, and expect to clean up your deficit. You just can't. Mm-hmm. I do happen to think that doing what is in the big beautiful bill will spur economic activity much more than raising taxes. And so as a result, if my choice is, okay, the big beautiful bill essentially, just kind of keeping the 2017 tax cuts and then maybe a few others, that's much more preferable than adding a whole bunch of taxes onto the equation right now. However, we still have that problem with just our U.S. government spending way too much money. And if we don't get a handle on that, don't get a handle on our deficits, our deficit spending is going to crowd out just about everything in, maybe 5 years'
Yeah,
time.
and part of the disappointment to me is the areas where, these bills try and offset decreases in revenue with decreases of expenses, right?
Yeah.
And try and make it neutral. And the cuts are to things like SNAP and Medicaid. They're just taking away a lot of these programs. And so I don't think that's not the change in government spending, right? That's not saying we're taking efficiency across the board that DOGE had promised. That's saying we're taking away a lot of these programs. And some of these have been some of the more successful government programs I think ever launched.
And with that, guys, thank you all so much. I think you and I are in complete agreement on that. I don't think there are very many Americans that want to see the cutting of the cutting of legitimate programs. I think we would all love to see the government make a step or get that train leaving the station, or whatever cliche you want to throw at it, in terms of being more efficient, in terms of cutting the fat that everyone knows is out there. But if you try to trim it too quickly, there's going to be a lot of economic upheaval. And right now, if we're not going to take DOGE seriously, if Elon Musk is going to leave Washington and Washington's not going to pay any attention to it and say, thank you for nothing, see you later, then one, why did we do it? Why did we get everyone upset? And then if we're not going to take it very seriously, then I think, frankly, Washington gets what it deserves in a few years' time.
Well, it makes me feel a little bit like, the term uniparty has been thrown out on and off for,
you're wearing a tinfoil hat.
Years and years. But I think there's a
ton of truth to that.
That really
it's in no one in Washington's best interest to change how things are currently
There's
being done.
very few, and it's interesting that some of the policies now of the Trump administration were policies that Bernie championed in 2016 when he was running for president, and so it's like this horseshoe. Things come back around, and again, it feels like no one's really seemingly trying to fix the issues. I mean, cutting and taking away SNAP benefits. SNAP's been one of the more successful economic government programs, and the return on investment is significant from that. Cutting that to then just cut tax rates, that's not solving the issue, right? That's taking away things that have been successful just to balance this bill is not going to be successful.
There's method to their madness. If they start cutting programs like that, then all of a sudden people go, no, don't cut programs. Well, I don't know what you want us to do. And as opposed to like going, you know what? All these consultants, we really don't need them. We just really don't need them. All these different agencies doing effectively the same thing.
Defense contractors getting cushy bills.
Yeah, all that type of stuff. You see it here locally and with local government. Just see some of the, I'm not going to say corruption, but see some of the
I'll say it.
questionable things that happen. There's questionable things that happen at the federal level, but that's kind of behind the scenes. That's the way things get done. People say, you don't know the way things get done. You've got to grease the skids and all that stuff. And so no one wants to upset that part of it because that's where their power base is. That's how individual legislators get paid, and that's how lobbyists get paid. That's how things, again, get done. Whereas you cut SNAP, you cut EBT, guess what? You're cutting some benefits for someone that doesn't chip in. So someone that doesn't pay to your campaign. And then you can just sit there and say, what do you want me to do? I'm doing what you told me to do.
Yeah. So not the best week.
How's that for cynical?
It's a little cynical. Not the
Well,
most.
it's a little bit cynical,
Not the most.
but I mean, it kind of is what it is. And the truth is, if we don't get serious about doing something about our budget deficit, and if Europe doesn't get serious about doing something about their budget deficit, our economies are going to grow much less rapidly than they would have ordinarily, which is not good for anyone.
Well, crowding out's a pretty simple, investment economic idea, and it's that the more government debt that is issued, right? That's supply, and prices go down and yields go up, and eventually that tends to take up and soak up a lot of the capital that could be better spent or better invested elsewhere. It's a pretty clear idea. It's kind of hard to argue with. It's been shown before, and if we continue on this trend, it's hard to argue that it doesn't just crowd out private investment. And so until something gets serious, we talked about, Besson has talked about it. For years we've talked about we have to grow our way out of this. And I agree, we do have to grow our way out of this.
But by growing, I'm not talking about growing at 2.6 relative to 2.4.
No.
Which is what the big, beautiful bill might do. I'm talking about growing at 3.4 relative to 2.4.
Yeah, getting closer to
I'm talking about growing it, not growing it faster than we would have ordinarily.
Yeah, because 2.4 to 2.6 does not change the trajectory.
No, it doesn't.
It's like you can talk about a bank's efficiency ratio and how much money it takes to create a dollar of revenue, and we're not doing a good job of that right now.
No,
we're doing a pretty horrible job.
It
of
takes
that
about it takes about $1.12 to create a dollar.
Yeah,
which is not what you
Cha-ching.
want. way to go. That's a good usage of it. So we do sound a little bit pessimistic. So let's move onward and upward with perhaps the tariffs and see whether or not we agree. One, whether or not the Court of International Trade in the United States made the right decision, and then two, whether or not the administration is just going to take it lying down.
Well, I think the Trump administration is not going to roll over.
No.
So I think that's off the table, and I do think there's probably validity in, the same people fine with these national emergencies were not fine with national emergencies from the previous administration.
Yeah.
And those people, the power of the president to just declare national emergencies and make changes in spending is arguably, I would say inarguably unconstitutional. I mean, where the purse strings are is not in the president's office. It's not in the Oval Office, and that has changed. And so I have had issues with it.
I don't see how anyone that's read the Constitution could argue.
I have issues with it from the past administration and from the current administration that I think the president has had too much power. The office of the president has started to have too much power. And I said it
Power that was originally unintended.
It is completely unintended. In fact, it's not like this, oops, that we gave them too much power. They're just not following the rules that are written into the U.S. Constitution. So it's not this workaround. We're just not, frankly, enforcing it. And so I have issue with it both ways. And I said it when the election was happening, and we talked about the vitriol going on around the election, that if who's in the office matters that much to what's going on in your daily life, that I think that office has been given too much power.
Well, gosh, it seems to make a whole lot of sense. I can't argue with you on that. And I'll tell you, I think probably the Court of International Trade probably made the right decision in this instance, particularly on the reciprocal, not necessarily on the reciprocal tariffs, but just on we're going to throw tariffs out there on everyone. Because it's hard to make that argument for economic emergency when the economy's been growing. And so you kind of sit there and go, where's the emergency with the economy growing? However, the Trump administration would be wise to go back, rethink this if it wants to proceed with tariffs, and instead of using a sledgehammer, use a scalpel. Going, okay, we do have and phrase it like, we've got an economic emergency in the fact that we do not control our own industrial supply chains when it comes to producing the material for our national defense. And if it comes at it like that and say we're going to put some tariffs on some of these Asian countries or products coming over there so we can promote or otherwise force the creation of industrial supply chains in the United States, I don't know if the Court of International Trade would have the same same argument, would sit there and say no. It's just a question of like, hey, I've got a clipboard here, I've got a corkboard here, and I'm going to slap all these tariffs on people, and I'm going to call it a national emergency. Okay, yeah, well, you didn't really prove anything. However, come back and say, this is why we're going to do it, this is what we're going to do, these are the countries that are going to get it, we've got 12 countries are going after, blah, blah, blah. I think Trump gets tariffs.
I think it's important to note that the court did not rule that all of these tariffs are unconstitutional. Exactly to your point of if there are for national security reasons, there's codes associated with some of these tariffs that those tariffs are able to stay on. So, and the whole point, I've heard people say, well, how does this court have the power to tell the president what to do? Well, the only reason this is happening is because of a national emergency declaration to skirt the law.
Yeah.
So that's why, if it is a power given to the presidency, there is no court that has the authority to do that, or I guess maybe the Supreme Court. I mean, I don't know, but these are happening as a secondary result of having to declare a national emergency to do this.
So what do you think the president's going to do?
I mean, I think he's going to double down, and I think I saw a reporter yesterday ask Trump, and I think this may go down as something we remember for the next couple of years, that he asked Trump himself about what some traders are calling the taco trade, which stands for Trump always chickens out. We get this big tariff and then we get a pause on it, or we get a delay of it. We saw it with the 90-day delay. We saw it with the pushback on the EU.
Yes.
And so that traders are going into trades off of the first negative news, expecting him to chicken out. And knowing how I interpret his personality, I think he took that question to heart in a very, very negative way. And I think may have ramifications for the remainder.
It says someone held up a mirror to him, and he didn't like it. Because there's a lot of... I heard someone laughing about it going, I've got a great idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make money. It's going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely awesome. I'm going to place 1,000% tariff on so-and-so. I'm going to do that on a Friday. Market's going to be down 75 basis points. And then over the weekend, I'm going to say, forget about it. And then the market's going to be up 2.5% on Monday.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy on Friday and I'm going to sell on Monday. That's kind of the way it's been.
Well, and that's been the market's reaction. Is
Yeah.
the reaction to it being taken off has been greater than the reaction to it being put on in the first place.
And by the way, that's a horrible Trump impression.
No argument on it.
So when I take a look at everything that's going on this past week, I'm kind of going, it wasn't a huge week for the president. It really wasn't. However, the ball is still in Washington's court. And I do think the president is going to double down with some of these countries. I think probably reduce the noise with some of these other ones and make a more solid argument. Right now, I would say the argument's been pretty weak, been kind of cavalier in a lot of ways, and that just made the ruling, if you want to call it that, by the Court of International Trade that much easier. It's just been a little bit cavalier. And here, hey, we're 45% with the Vietnamese. Why not? It's going. Oh, you don't like 30 with the Chinese? You're going to fight back? How about 145?
Yeah.
Just all that type of stuff does not necessarily suggest an economic emergency.
Yeah.
You suggest I'm kind of winging it a little bit. So I do think the president hopefully will take this as a learning lesson that I got to tighten the bolts and screws on this a little bit more. And if I'm serious about this, and I've got good, strong reasons why I want to do it, I'm going to make a stronger case, not just to the court system, but to the remainder of the world, let alone the American taxpayer / voter. Now, in terms of DOGE, very disappointed by it. Very disappointed by how it all unfolded. Came out a little bit too hot, came out a little bit too braggadocious, found a little bit too much fat, and found a little bit too much waste that frankly got a little depressing for me. And then ultimately at the end of it, all we really found out is, well, everything's kind of broken and everything's kind of fat and very inefficient. And you know what? We're not going to do
Everyone's
anything.
kind of fine with it.
And we're not going to do anything about it. And that's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
In terms of the big beautiful bill or whatnot, listen, don't get me wrong, I'm already taxed enough. I don't feel like paying any more for the inefficiency that Elon Musk proved to me that we have. I don't feel like paying anything more for that. So I'm okay with extending the 2017 tax cuts. But unless those things really ramp up overall gross domestic product growth more rapid than what we've seen recently, we're going to have to start making some cuts somewhere. I mean, that's just the long and short of it. Otherwise, we will continue to grow our deficit, $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion a year, and then in relatively short order, we're going to have a, my Lord, debt service of $2.5 trillion a year, over $2 trillion bucks, and that's a problem. And then, if that's not scary enough, we'll have so many bills out there, so many short-term bills. It's going to soak up just a ton of cash.
Yeah.
And we might actually, because the government has spent so much money, this is what's so crazy about, we might end up having a liquidity problem. Mm-hmm. And that the fact that too many bills and not enough cash.
Yeah.
And that's what's crazy about it. So all these things, we've got to take this stuff seriously. And right now, with the way DOGE went down and with the way the bill got passed, with the way that I would argue that the administration's gone about tariffs, we're not being as serious about things as we really need to be. And Lord knows I'm maybe not the world's most detailed, anal, retentive person when it comes to that type of stuff. But even I know that if you're going to make serious arguments about serious long-term problems, you have to have a pretty serious game plan.
Well, the root problem to me is that no one wants to be the one to be in office or to be to blame when that pain is felt for that change. And we've talked about a million times the GDP equation, the C plus I plus G, the G being the government expenditure, but really the every dollar the government spends then leaks into everything else, right?
Yes.
It's not siloed necessarily just into this G, because then it becomes salaries and it becomes consumption. I mean, that all it goes into the economy. That's a portion of why people talk about cash on the sidelines being $7 trillion. That's not money to go back into the stock market. That is just the total amount of assets in this economy growing. And that's going to cause significant amount of pain if we really want to change this trajectory. I mean, there's companies who all their jobs is government contracts and what have you. And if you start to remove some of those, that's jobs you remove.
It's jobs you
That's
remove.
salaries you remove. That's
it's
then
cash
people
that's
go into
floating
restaurants.
without a doubt.
I mean, it doesn't stop at the G in the GDP equation if you remove that.
No, it doesn't. However, if we don't get a handle on it, because that because we are borrowing more money than we're generating in terms of economic activity. Because the debt to GDP ratio is increasing, Washington has been using leverage very inefficiently. So what everything that you just said is absolutely spot on. But again, if you're borrowing $1.20 in order to generate $1 worth of economic activity, long term you got to figure out how.
That
to
can
make
work in the short term.
and it can work in the short term, and everyone's got a job, and everyone's happy. But longer term, that's a definition or a recipe for absolute failure. It's kind of like, and I've used this analogy with people when trying to explain some of this stuff. It's kind of like you take a starving man and you give him an ice cream sundae. Now that's great, loves it, tasty, puts on a little bit of weight. You keep him, give him ice cream sundaes. You know what? They're still tasty. Keeps on putting weight until all of a sudden he's got some real problems with little diabetes too. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so you keep on feeding him ice cream, going, well, it's always worked in the past. I can't do this because he really likes it.
And then the flip side is, well, do you want him to starve?
Yeah. Do you want him to? You want him to starve? And we can't do that. However, that if you don't do this, he's going to have greater health problems. Maybe not the best analogy, but it works for people that really either can't see the big picture or don't want to get down in the weeds to it. So you kind of add it all up. It's been kind of I would not call it a great week for the president.
No.
President's really going to have to go back, I think, tighten it up a little bit, make a little bit stronger case for it, and be far more laser focused on particular countries, particular rules, and particular initiatives that he would like to do with DOGE, if it really even exists after Elon Musk is no longer around. And we're going to have to figure out a way to grow the economy much more rapidly than what we've seen recently, although you can't complain with growth, but if we have to grow even that much more rapidly in order to make sure that the 2017 tax cuts, we can truly pay for them, given Washington's propensity to spend money it doesn't have.
I agree.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com. Also, you can always leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. If you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we got to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com, OAKWORTH.com, and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of exciting information. Also, I do have to point out that anything you've heard here today are just the opinion of me and Sam as of the moment we make it, and does not necessarily reflect the views of Oakworth Capital Bank, any of its directors, shareholders, stakeholders, employees, all associates, I guess I should say, any of that good stuff. And anything you hear here should not be considered an offer to buy or sell investment securities or services of any type.
It's a lot.
That's a lot. Anything else you got to say today, Sam, on this exciting topic?
That's all I've got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.